So we're going to keep on talking about Unreal because it's so versatile and there's so many things that are available. And broadcast graphics has been something that Unreal has been focused on for a little while and building up, and we're seeing it keep on rolling out. And we wanted to give everybody a little bit more of an overview of how that can work, because I think that there's a lot of us could use this. Remember that Unreal is free. If you're making less than $1 million, and so if you're out there looking for something that I want to do some graphics, and there's when we were talking about flying through a map or flying through a city, having graphics, all those things. These are things that you can throw together really quickly in Unreal, and we're really excited about where Epic's taking all of that and what they make available to all of us. And the perfect person to talk about this is Nick Justishin, who has joined us once again. Hey, Nick, good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
So tell us, how do we get started? How do we get started with motion graphics in Unreal?
Yeah, so motion graphics in Unreal is a kind of a different beast from everything else in Unreal. It's really developed specifically for motion graphics artists. So I can, let's see, there we go. Now we're demoing our screen.
And one of the things, by the way, that is really important is that they did the hardest thing first before adding all of these tools and all these graphics. That Unreal got the 2997, 5994, getting that all working without, in a broadcast output, and figuring out what it took to integrate with broadcast graphics was the piece that if they didn't do that first, and they did that years ago, if they didn't do that first, it wasn't going to, none of this other stuff was going to work. And so just do know that we can get that actual these graphics out properly. And I'll go hand it back to Nick.
Yeah, sure. So hopefully you can see my screen behind me. And really, all these features come built in with the perfectly free version of Unreal Engine. So speaking of getting the important parts done first, as it's released right now, motion design is considered an experimental feature. So there's a lot more coming than beyond what I'm able to show, and especially in the context of a live show like this at the moment. But they're working on making this friendly and usable for design artists coming out of Photoshop, After Effects, Cinema 4D, those kinds of tools that are the more common tools used in motion design. And more features are going in. There should be another, we're in version Unreal Engine 5.4 right now. I would, if their release pattern holds true, there'll be a 5.5 this fall at some point. That will have more features and all of that sort of thing. But this motion design plugin is built in for free, and you just kind of go into the edit menu, plugins, and turn that on. And anyone that's used Photoshop and After Effects and all is familiar with turning on plugins. And you were actually just mentioning about broadcast standards. So yes, Unreal Engine outputs at broadcast standard frame rate, so you can do 5997, and it's fully supported, and it supports hardware output too. So I can go to Blackmagic, for example, and I have a Blackmagic Decklink board in my computer, and built into Unreal, it will address those boards and send data out. If AJA is your favorite tool, AJA is built in as well. And there's lots of these kinds of plugins that are built in to the engine and included with it for free. This is the Unreal Engine view, but one of the things that I've done is I've activated this motion design plugin in motion design mode. So some of the things that are immediately different are that in the viewport, for example, it's going to behave more like After Effects and Photoshop than a traditional Unreal Engine viewport. So normally in Unreal Engine, I would be browsing around or navigating in this viewport three-dimensionally. But instead now, when I zoom in with my mouse wheel, I'm actually zooming in and moving about two-dimensionally in the frame. So I could actually get outside of the frame of the camera, etc. So I'm working very much like I was in Photoshop or After Effects. I can bring out guides. In theory, I could bring out guides from these rulers that I don't have them turned on for some reason. I am in motion design mode. So I probably have the guides turned off. Yeah, anyway. The other thing is, like, if I get lost, I can just hit the home key and I'm back home. And in this mode too, I can add geometry, but it'll behave like it's in a 2D space. So if I double click on a rectangle, for example, it's going to move around as I would expect in more of like a
And
two-dimensional.
is that a flat rectangle?
It is right now, and you can see kind of its shadow is flat. But if I want to, I can extrude it. So over here somewhere, I should.
That interface is behind you.
Behind you. What's that?
It's behind you. Your interface is behind you. Like yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's behind me. So I can pull this out. That's one of the nice things about Unreal is it lets me pull this out. So in here somewhere, I should have an extrude, and if it's not built in, actually, what I can do is use.
Well, it doesn't need to be
called,
like this. Would be like a lower third or a graphic or something that pulled in. So you don't
yeah,
necessarily
usually
need
it
to do that
is.
way.
But I can go ahead and I can add extrude to that, right? So now this is
You can see the
extruding
shadow.
three-dimensionally. And this is all procedural dynamic, right? So these little diamonds mean I can keyframe any of this if I wanted to in an animation. And this shape, for example, is also dynamic. So I can go ahead and let's see, I'm going to deactivate the XY lock. And so now I can expand this left to right. I'm just going to dock this over here behind me again. And what else can I do? I can kind of shape this in my lower thirds design. So hopefully this will wake up for me in a second. We can slant the edges. We can bevel the edges. We can also curve everything. I'm kind of locked up with too many things running at the same time here. Hopefully this will come back. Oh no. The other thing about these,
as I said, this is experimental.
Yeah, this is the experimental side of it. And to be fair, I am really loading down my computer pretty heavily right now because what we're doing here is you're seeing behind me a NDI monitor view being fed to the ATEM as a background. And that is, there we go, now we're awake. The background is being, NDI'd inside the computer. So anyway, I should be able to, I'm still, something's still locked. I will keep this here. Okay. What I'm going to do is completely lose sight of everything that I've got. And let's open a viewport. Viewport 1 says it's open. Oh, there it is. Okay. So we'll put that here, and we'll put our content browser back here, and we will activate and deactivate motion design mode, and hopefully things will land back where they need to be. Okay. So selecting this now, there we go. Now we can control our slants, and we can control rounding and things like that. So that all of this is dynamic. And I can even copy paste all of these settings to other rectangles and shapes. The other thing to know about these is that there's a lot of power in just an individual shape. So this is a ring. And of course, I can relock this and make that nice and large. But this ring is a ring because it's got 64 sides. If I give it 8 sides, it's now an octagon. If I give it 3 sides, it's a triangle, and so on and so forth. So this one shape can actually be quite a few different shapes. And again, all of this is keyframeable, animatable. And we can also, in this process, if we wanted to, add modifiers that would allow for continuous animation as well. So our that operator stack that I was showing earlier, let me just float this window. We can go into animators here, and I can add an animator to wiggle. And we'll just do location. There we go. And so now we're wiggling that. And of course, we have all your requisite settings with all of that.
And what does the keyframing look like? What's the timeline look like as you start to do this?
Yeah, sure. Basically, the timeline is something we call Sequencer. And so here it is at the bottom of the screen here. And so if I want to animate this, I can select it and I can add it to a track. This ring is now part of my animation, and I will add here we go. Add a transformation track to that. So this should be pretty familiar with anyone that's worked with Cinema 4D or After Effects and such. Here we are. And we'll key it back to the same place. And so here I've got auto keying switched on. So now that I've got a couple keys, I can push it over here and push it over here. And so now that's all keyed. And if I want to, of course, I can loop this animation as well. And the other thing about this is I do have the ability to change the nature of these keyframes in terms of the curves with some templates. So let me.
And it looked like, I wasn't sure if it's just the rendering that's coming through Zoom. It looks like it's adding motion blur to it as it moves. Is that?
It does. Yeah.
It's interesting.
It has motion blur. I've got glow and bloom and atmosphere, all kinds of visual settings activated right now. So we get a lot of that little sweetening to our scene. Okay. So right now, this is kind of an ease in, ease out motion. Mm-hmm. But over here, I can select from a variety of templates. So maybe I want it to start off slowly and then snap in. So, and I'm doing that without any, changing of the keyframes. The keyframes stayed exactly the same. I can set them back to linear if I wanted to, or maybe add a little bit.
And what does that curve look like? So you have that between that. What does it look like if you add another keyframe in the middle?
All right, let's try that. We'll do this, and I can add another key. And maybe what I'll do is push this a little bit. And there is a full graph editor, right?
Yeah.
So
there we go. That's what I was looking for.
This is the chaos. Yeah. So if you want the full graph editor, you got it.
And I guess they call it a graph editor. We would call it. I mean, we would typically call it an F curve editor. This is the function curve of position over time, and this is where I spend a lot of time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is where you really kind of work to sweeten the overall animation. So, like, I can give this a little bit of overshoot in here if I want to, and kind of move this a bit more. So, okay, we sit still, and then we're going to snap it. We're going to overshoot and come back now.
And when you're looking at that, when you're watching that, what that is, that's again the function of position over time. And so what you're able to do is when you see those curves, when it flattens out, it's moving very slowly. When it's steep, it's moving very quickly. And you can start to see continuity things. So if you break it, it'll look like it hits hard because because it has that. So if you want it to ease out, you always want it to be kind of a soft landing. But you can see here that what Nick just did there will go very slow, then very fast, and then kind of overshoot and snap in because of the way that function curve works. And you can see now you've broken the Bezier curve in the center, so it's going to do a hard shift.
Yeah. Right. So there's going to be a pop here. So I can put this down here, squeeze this a little bit so we can play. So you will see a pop. There we go. Yeah. So you can art direct that motion very easily.
And we have a question we got a couple questions coming in, so we'll get to those. If you have questions about this as we work, go ahead and throw those questions into Makana. So go ahead, Bill.
Eduardo Augustine from Panama City has the first one. He says, can I recreate the first down yellow line, I believe, using Unreal? I want to get this into the project for my community football games.
Oh. And I don't think so.
The answer is yes.
You can track it in. You can track it. It'll track.
Not natively with Unreal. So that's the piece that you would have to add. There's a couple options. If you have a fixed camera, right? So it's on a tripod. You're not going to pan that camera. You could use green screen keying built into Unreal Engine to key on the grass color. Ideally, your grass is green. And with that camera locked, you can even apply the lens distortion that's in that lens. And there's an actual tool built into Unreal that will analyze the lens distortion of your camera with using a checkerboard grid and all. And so then you can essentially manually align your scene in Unreal to fit that the pitch, the field that you're matching to. And then from then you can add a rectangle like I had in before as the line and move that around. And in theory, that could be done. It's a good bit of work, especially manually, to set that up the very first time. But once you've got it set up, you'd be in good shape as long as the camera is locked. If you're going to move the camera like you see in NFL games and other professional sports, in that case, you would need a camera tracking system. And there are a variety of them available. They're expensive. So the typical application in let's say basketball, for example, might be using a Stipe or a MoSys system where there are reflectors either on the floor or in the ceiling that a tracking camera attached to the filming camera is following along, so that anytime that camera moves, it knows exactly where the lens is at all times. And there are a few alternative things, but like I think we saw something before that's based on an iPhone.
I think
those won't be as accurate. It won't be accurate enough to handle a kind of a line marker.
I do think that, what's interesting is also think about how quickly can you add that line marker. And so it's like you have a tracked, you have it locked, and you may end up using a little bit of a difference key versus a green screen key or a little bit of both. So figuring out that key is going to be hard, and the tools have gotten incredibly good for what you see on television now. But a locked off camera that had the whole thing. And remember, you don't have to necessarily see the whole field. I mean, you could cut off a little bit of the corners if you didn't or whatever. And each camera any camera that you have set up like that, the easiest thing to do, unless you really have the budget for it, is to do something exactly what Nick has said, is just don't move that camera around. Now, there are also, remember that there are telemetry data, like if you have some of the Panasonic cameras have telemetry data, so they can tell Unreal where they're pointed. And you could theoretically get that synced up so that the field moved with it, but you need to be able to get that telemetry data back. And that's, again, where Nick was talking about MoSys and some of the other ones, or MoSys. One of the things that you could do, and I don't know whether that data, I think that the data in some of the scoreboards, they'll type the data in of where the first down is or what the ball's on. You could theoretically, but you want to have something in Unreal where you have an interface that you can type in, this is where the first down marker belongs, right? So instead of you trying to figure out where to move it, once you figure out that polygon, you're going to have a rectangle that you're matching on the field, and you're getting it all matched to it. Then what you probably want to do is have a behavior where you can just type in a number, and that marker, that line marker, will go to the right yard number. So if you type in 33, it just goes and just moves over. So you're not trying to figure it out, like by moving it the way you would like animate it or slide it along. You'd have a line that goes across, and all you got to do is type in the number, and that line would move to where it needs to be. So that way you'd be able to get that done really quickly, and then you'd have to worry about the compositing. So I don't know if Nick wants that.
And you can do that definitely in Unreal. I mean, there's a whole lot of visual programming type of tools, so that you don't have to write code necessarily. You can drag and drop little math nodes and things like that.
It's a really interesting problem. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, I've done the first hour on Unreal Engine tutorial, and it's a good introduction to those interested in game development. Is there an equivalent for motion design with Unreal Engine?
So that is coming. I know that it's in development in terms of like a first hour for motion design. There is a variety of really good YouTube channels. So I would, Winbush is one. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel, Pixel Prof, that is motion design breakdown. And so I have a complete scene, and then I kind of break down, this is how I built it up from scratch and brought in SVG files for a logo. And I would definitely go to that. Go to Pixel Prof and find the motion design playlist, and there's one that has a little shield with the words motion design on it, and that's a nice place to start. And I'm not doing that. If you want to, like and subscribe. If you don't want to, that's fine too. that's a pretty good primer on that because it goes through many of the features and in a practical application. And then you kind of take it from there and investigate the things that you want to do.
Now, if you want to do can you show us a little bit of like if I wanted to build a lower third or something like that flew in?
Oh, yeah.
What would that look like?
So let me open up a file and give you my screen again. So here is a simple lower thirds project. So hopefully you can see the screen here. And if I have hit play, I've got a little office hours logo pops up. It does some little dancing in the center first and snaps into place. And then we've got our backdrop and our Graphics Tuesday. Okay, so this overall is a pretty simple template. This is a rectangle. And again, it's got the different slants and the rounding done. The office hours logo came in as an SVG file. And the nice thing about these SVG files is that I do have direct access to all the different shapes that are in it. I could animate them independently if I wanted to, or in groups. So in this case, I took the different gear sprockets and spun them in different directions. And I'm sure Alex is like cringing right now because it's not what he would want, but it's decent as a demo. Now, the nice thing about all of this is I can activate a window called Remote Control and use that to make the text and say the color of the backdrop something that I can set depending on what I want on any given.
And in this case, you're exposing certain attributes to this controller, so you don't have to show if you want someone to have that control, you put it up there. You're publishing that basically to that controller, so you don't have to give someone doesn't have to deal with, and even that can be even you. You don't have to deal with all the complexity of where the keyframes are or anything else. You're just saying, well, these are the only things I need to change. Exactly,
and it's super easy to show that off and add things to this. There's in each property there's a little video game controller icon, and you just click that and it adds it into this remote control. And so I can have as many of these different templates as I might like. And then there is basically a rundown. So for doing rundown of show. So if I go into my assets here, I've got a playlist. And if I double click that, this is my rundown. And I think I have my my stuff turned on. So if I select, I've brought in that template, and then I've created a couple different pages with it. And here you can see that on page 1, I've got the text set to Graphics Tuesday and the color set to blue. And on page 2, I've changed the text and given a different color. So what I'll do here is, now this will take a moment. I'm going to go into my broadcast settings and connect Unreal to my Decklink board so that it will output these graphics to the Decklink. And I can even do that with Alpha Channel. So I have a Decklink Duo, and so it's got 4 SDI outputs. And I've got one pair set to a single channel. So here is my Blackmagic. Here's the Duo. I've got it configured so that the 4 outputs are configured as 2 pairs. So I'll take output number 1, say that that's going to be my output channel. I'll select that, and I'm just going to get into the properties for this. And I want to do fill and key. And my my desktop here is just set for a flat 30 frames a second. So I will go there. But again, you can see our broadcast standard frame rates are available here.
It's behind your head again.
I'll apply that, and I'll fire up that channel. Okay, so now this is live, and it's putting out the whatever channels that I send from my playlist. So if I select a page here, let's activate these as selectable. And I'll take this one and I'll take it in. And it should be in. Let's check my channel. It's showing up here. And let's just see if my ATEM, where's my ATEM software? ATEM software is not turned on. I might not have my key downstream key on. Okay. Seems like my keyer is not keyering. All right. Okay. So I'll, unfortunately, I'm not sure why that is not going out in my deck link. Let's just for fun. Let's do this one more time. Yep. These you're seeing my outputs right now.
They look a lot darker than I expected.
Yeah, they look a lot darker than they should be, right? So, all right.
Put on
Anyway, this should be the output right now, and the output would normally be going to my ATEM. So this is the first output, and now what I can do is, let me just peel this off so you can see this output channel in parallel with my rundown sheet. So now I can do take next. And these animations, by the way, are configured in such a way that take in does one animation, take out does another animation, right? And so I can take that in again after it's finished doing its thing.
What's it doing when it's doing its thing?
Yeah. And then there's also a, once this finishes being locked up, there we go. So we'll
what's that time frame? Is it rendering it, or is it?
No, I think there's just too much open on my computer. So this is my first time trying to demo all of these features at once while using NDI to capture my screen, send it to another output. I guess I'm overdoing it. Normally this runs just instant real time. So it just plays out the animation. And then there's also a animation that's different for transitioning from one lower third to another. So instead of taking it in or taking it out, I'm actually changing. And that animation fades out the text, retracts the bar, but then extends the next bar. So if I take next, that's a different animation. So that's how that's working. And that, by the way, I do have the checkbox that I affectionately call Alex hates this checkbox turned on, where the font will squish itself to make sure it fits into the...
No, not that.
Yeah. But that's an available setting. You can have that on or off for the text objects so that it will maintain, all of the text inside the bar instead of like my last name is kind of a pain in the neck to deal with. So there we go.
That's great. And so you could build that up as these are different things, but these are now. Could you build an interface that had like I want to do the lower third or do this? Does it have to be in that list, or could you could build pretty much anything you wanted, right?
Exactly. In fact, you could tie this into say Bitfocus Companion with your Stream Deck array. Mm-hmm. So the OSC standard that's recognized by Bitfocus Companion, as well as HTTP for that matter, is also available in Unreal Engine. So those two can communicate with each other, and you can actually have like Unreal trigger the Bitfocus Companion and vice versa.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what's interesting is that it does all the motion graphics, but you still have a game engine underneath it. So there's all these interactions and all these interfaces and all these protocols that are available to you. Whether it's OSC or DMX, you could have this tied in where there's a command. It can send out the DMX commands out to other lighting as it's doing those things. So what did you fix there?
I basically just went in and turned the deck link on and off right here.
You jiggled the handle.
So I turned it off, and then I turned it on. Now it works.
Yeah.
And I got it. So now that that's working, I can take it out. I can take the next one, etc. So all of that's working here now. And so what's happening is the graphics are being sent out via the deck link, and that's including the alpha channel and RGB. And then that it's a pair of outputs, right? So we have an RGB SDI out and a alpha channel SDI out. They're going into channels 3 and 4 of the ATEM. And so that's set up in the downstream key. So that basically this is my RGB, this is my key, and I can turn that on and off. I'm sorry, here, this way you can see what's going on here. So if I turn off my key, you can see the downstream key settings right here. RGB is camera 4, key source is camera 3. And this is a ATEM mini SDI nothing. So it's, I don't know if it's even still available. So it's just a 4 input, 2 output. And if I activate my downstream key.
Is it a mini with an SDI?
Yeah. So
And
it's
so-
4 SDI inputs and 2 SDI outs.
For some reason, I forgot that they made one of those. I have the extreme version of that, but I forgot that they made one with SDI. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks like the key fill is working well, even though it's not. They're not. Gen locked or anything else. So.
Yeah. And again, ATEM's really forgiving on that in terms of its caching. So I don't have gen locking on.
Right.
I could gen lock Unreal Engine to the output of the ATEM, right? So I
Right.
could physically gen lock them. Even though the ATEM doesn't take a gen lock input, I could take the SDI out of the ATEM, connect that into the DEC link board of the computer, and then tell Unreal Engine gen lock to that signal. And then the DEC link and Unreal Engine would be gen locked to that ATEM.
That's great. Anything else you want
And
to show us? Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean that's that. The only thing I didn't get into is the cloners and all that too. But I don't know if there's any questions in the queue.
Nope, not right now. So go ahead and
Okay.
show us some cloners.
All right. So I'm going to close out all those windows and turn that off. And so another big Control Shift S to save everything. Add to this feature set is the idea that it has a cloning system. So it's kind of like basically turning models into particles, right? So in this case, I've just got a little setup. I'm going to stay in selection mode and bring my default viewport. All right, and select this. And so what I can do here is, there's a camera in there. That's why. All right, let's just look through that camera. Ta-da. Okay. What I can do is add in motion design mode. I will add a cloner. Let's eject from this and make sure my perspective is nice and wide. Okay. All right. So a little backpack, some lights, and a set.
I don't think we see
What I'm
that.
going to do.
Could you share that with us?
Yeah, minor detail. I'm sorry. I keep forgetting that. Be sure to remind me anytime I forget to turn on my screen share. All right. So here's my scene setting. I've got a backpack, some lights, a little backdrop, camera, and all that kind of thing. So I'm just going to go into adding some extra. Let's first of all create a cloner. So I'll go into actors and create a cloner. And now I've got that put into the scene. And so basically what this is doing is taking a single shape and cloning it over and over again. Let's see if this is this outliner. I don't want you there. I want you to float. Okay, so here's my cloner, and it's got a cube inside it right now. And so that is giving us some basic cloning ability right now. Let me float out my details panel. And so what I want to do is clone something else. So I'm going to delete that cube. And instead, I'm going to grab some colorful spheres. So in here somewhere, I have a ball. I'll go get my ball. All right, here's an exercise ball, alt drag, and now I've got 4 of these in the scene. And I can, with this one selected in my details here, I can find the material by clicking on the Find Material button. And since I have that, I can start applying different versions of that onto these 4 different balls. And finally, I'm going to take these 4 exercise balls and make them a child of the cloner. And as soon as I do that, now I've got an array of these balls, and it's, kind of distributing them. And with that done, now I can start playing with the settings of the cloner itself. So right now we're doing a grid.
And that one's behind your head again.
It's behind my head. There we go. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So we've got line, circle, sphere is kind of cool. Spherical uniform. There we go. Interestingly, these are still completely selectable. So I can take these spheres, for example, and
they can really have their own looping behavior, their own colors. They can, have their own little animations, right?
Each of these, there can be animations and forces added onto these through what we call effectors. And they can each have like their settings adjusted. So like I can 0.5 and make them a little bit smaller. So in terms of effectors, what I can do is say, all right, I am going to select that cloner again, and I'm going to spawn a linked effector. And so this effector now in the window is something that could apply forces to things or offsets and such. So this is now selected, and let's see what we're doing here. It should be selected. No, the cloner's still selected. Select that effector. Here we are. Okay, so now what this effector is doing right now is pushing anything it touches up by 100, right? So I can move these around like that. Or let's just make this a lot bigger. I can add, let's do a curl noise force, right? So now everything's kind of getting some force added to it. Let's reduce that size, turn it on and off and on. So now we've got that animation going. I think I can add should be able to add a rotational forces and animations like that. Let's see what else we can do. Ooh, a noise field to rotation. There we are. And here we go. So now these are actually spinning around. I could probably increase the strength of this. Oops. These should be very subtly kind of rotating right now. Rotation strength, noise field, frequency. Let's see if we increase that frequency. They're moving a little bit. And again, I can add that curl noise. So, we can add all of these different forces and different animations to this. And these can animate continuously, and there's lots of settings for all of that.
And you can build some pretty complex, you could have them attracted to each other, right? I mean, they could be...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can attract to one another. The other thing is, we've just been showing kind of for this cloner, just basically geometric patterns, but we could also attach them to a mesh. So I can sample this from the backpack, for example. Where's my backpack? Here's my backpack. And let me just position the cloner so that it's in exactly the same place as the backpack.
And we had a question while you're working on that.
Oh, great.
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Douglas Carmichael says, how can you control the main camera in the timeline?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Basically, if this is our main camera, we can look through that camera. This is what that camera sees. I'm going to just get rid of my cloner system now. And we can add that camera right here. So let me just eject from it for a second. Select that camera, add it to the timeline. There's that camera. And now I've got keyframes for that. So I can keyframe where it is right now. Add a keyframe and go to the end and reposition this here. And it's automatic keyed, or I can force a keyframe. And so now that camera's animated. That's how we do that.
That's great. Thanks, Nick.
Absolutely.
I think that this is a really great. I think that understanding that it's not very expensive, especially if you want to get started, and that you're learning something that can be extended to lots and lots of other tools. I mean, I think that one of the things Epic's doing really well is giving you something where the interface changes for this to make it more like 2D, but you are getting comfortable with Unreal as well. And you can, you have a lot of 3D tools that you're able to bring in, and a lot of the other, because you could still go back and utilize all the things that Unreal can do inside of the broadcast area, right? I mean, so you can be bringing models in and a lot of the things we've seen in the past, but you still have the broadcast tools on top of that. And I think it's really powerful. So
yeah, there's loads of, basically it can do almost anything, in terms of particle effects, fluid simulations. And some of these tools can also be leveraged in creative ways. So that cloner, for example, you can have that cloning based over a mesh, right? And so imagine that backpack, for example, where you were cloning a squiggly loop of thread over that surface. And so now that effector could go and make that really, really large and give you the effect of, an animated CG embroidering happening.
Right. By the way, it's funny. I was talking to someone about the Game of Thrones open, or not the Game of Thrones, but the House of the Dragon or whatever that's out right now. It's funny. It's all embroidery. It's not the simple models that were there before. It's all embroidery, and I actually don't find it very compelling. Like just to say, but I will say that I said somebody who does CG did that, sold them on the idea of doing embroidery because it's really hard. Like the flex that they did to show the embroidery, I was like, that's a really hard thing to do well and make it look, to animate it. So it's a harder thing to do than the castles and everything else from Game of Thrones, but not as impressive, not as visually appealing. But I felt like someone just really was like, you don't understand how hard this is to do. All our people will go, whoa, that's hard. That would take a long time. And so anyway, it's just a funny thing that you want to look at when you talk about that.
I mean, and there are things that you can do very, very quickly with these tools that look incredibly complex. And that's really the idea behind a lot of these things. I'm just kind of setting up an empty stage again, and I will go ahead and I'll go ahead and add that cloner again, and I'll just accept the default cubes, for example. So actor, cloner, click it twice. Now I've got my cloner in the scene, and if I were to bring up my details panel again, hopefully I can still find that. Details. Here we are. Okay. Select that cloner. Let's just say I make this cloner into just a two-dimensional layout. So my grid is going to have just one in Z. So now these are laying on the ground. I'm 3 by 3. So let's make this 10 by 10. And I will just leave it at that, right? So I'm going to eject from this camera here. Okay. And I want to go into making sure I'm in my default viewport. There we are. This will behave a little bit better for me. Okay, so now I can add an effector to the cloner. So select my cloner and spawn a linked effector. And you can see now, just by animating, either I can move the cloner over the effector, or I can move the effector around the cloner. And right now I'm just using 10 by 10, but I could dramatically increase the number of these cubes. This could be a collection of buildings, for example. Right. Yeah. And so very quickly you can assemble things that look complicated that really were just a few different settings.
I have a challenge for you, Nick.
Uh-oh.
For another show, not today.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So let me see if I can find it really quickly. This is what we should do, I think. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm sure it's somewhere on the internet.
I guess what I'll do while you're searching that is note that for anyone that's in Seattle or plans to go to Unreal Fest in Seattle, it's going to be that first few days of October. What I'm just now starting to prep like a specific class in this that'll be for October for Unreal Fest. So there'll be a class that's Intro to Motion Design for anyone who's brand new. It's an in-person class. And then following that, there is also a blueprints for motion designers. So blueprint is where all the automation comes in and communicating with Big Focus Companion and, doing, importing files and making all your text based on imported files. So it's 2 different 1-hour classes specifically on this at Unreal Fest. So, yeah.
I can't find it on YouTube, which is really weird. It's something like this. Because other people have done it in different ways, but it's this. I think when I was watching what you were doing there, what I was thinking is this would be really cool when you're doing the thing. So you have the pin map, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And this one's okay. They made it too high resolution, so it doesn't look it actually doesn't look as good, in my opinion. The person who did it, I mean, it was really cool. The map is really cool. I like the thing. So, but I think overall, it's a really interesting little way to do that. But I think it'd be fun to try to reproduce that, like that pin map. And I couldn't find it. I was kind of surprised. I guess they must have gotten.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I've done it in Electric Image a long time ago, but I couldn't do it in real time. Now you could do it theoretically in real time, because what we did is we had the values of the grayscale, whatever was underneath it. The value of the grayscale was attenuating the Y position of the pins, so that's how we, so you could literally have an animated text. You just animate a video, and that black and white map would drive the pin positions. That's how we did it a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was actually Cinema 4D. I don't think it was in, but it still rendered. It took some time to render.
Sure.
Cool. So that's it.
Yeah. And I can share, this is a video that I did a tutorial on earlier. If I bring this up. And so this is a character moving around. And what we end up doing here is there's also Boolean modeling is built in. So
right.
I can remove the geometry of the helmet. And so what's happening is I've got a cloner on this helmet. Right now, all of the little facets that are in that cloner are all scaled down to almost 0, so you can't see them at all. But when we play through, the effector hits those, and basically you end up seeing these little facets. There we go. So these things appear, and it's kind of like an imaginary nanotech and that's covering that little band of these little shiny facets is covering over the seam where that helmet is being removed. So that retracts. And then this is motion design too. So this is a cloner floating around, and then all of that. And then we bring that helmet back. So that's a whole, all of the helmet effect and the, and some of that hologram are all being done with motion design. And that's being done with the motion design tools in a cinematic scene. So,
right.
That's to your point earlier about how, as you learn these motion graphics tools, you still have full access to all that Unreal has.
Yeah.
So that you can integrate that into animations if you were doing animation in Unreal Engine, or you can take animations and integrate them into your motion graphics.
Yeah, one of the things that I, by the way, as a little thing that you can also play with is if you want things to interact with when I'm traveling. I did a couple of these when I was on the trip to Arizona is if I see something interesting, I'll use Polycam or something like that to just capture some geometry, and then I'll capture the image that I want or a video of that image, because now I captured the geometry that it fits on. And then now I can fit it to doing effects and stuff like that. I have to admit that I kind of collect those. I go, oh, this would be really cool. I should have done it at the Grand Canyon, but I think I was so conscious that I was 800 feet off the ground that I was having a hard time concentrating on the rocks.
Yeah, you should be conscious of that. That's the way you
Grand
should
Canyon
be.
will do that to you.
There's so many stories of people who weren't.
Well, I told the person I was staying with my aunt and uncle that night, and I said, man, I can't believe, because there's some places there's no rails, and I said, I can't believe that people don't fall off every day. Well, they said, well, 3 fell off last week.
They do, that's the problem.
So it was kind of like, you should probably pay attention to it. But I think that I caught some stuff at some safer places. But I think, always think about what you're trying to do and constantly collecting that data. We got one more question. Let's go ahead and jump into it.
Sure. Robert Green in Los Angeles says, for those not close enough to take your in-person course, do you recommend any online courses, Nick?
I'm not. Oh, you know what? I think the School of Motion is actually planning to do a Unreal Engine motion design.
The School of Motion, by the way, is fantastic. There's a lot of folks that I know that are there that are really good at what they do. So it's really great.
No, and I mean, they're like heavily steeped in Cinema 4D and After Effects and all that. And they, so I would check with that. At some point, not, the lab that I present at Unreal Fest will not be recorded live or streamed. But I think the intent is to create a course or, a separate presentation of that. And at some point too.
And I'm equipping up so that we can do some labs with Nick in the near future too, so that Nick and I will just sit there and work through something together. So stay tuned for that as well. Hopefully we'll get the first one in September. So working on that right now. Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thanks to the panelists for the first hour and the second hour. And we can't do this without you. And thanks to the producers out there asking all the questions, keeping the questions rolling through the first hour and the second hour. Great work. And thanks to the incredible team that puts this together. There are people who are they're managing what we're going to talk about. They're managing folks that are the guests and making sure everything's going to work. They're designing the hardware and the software that makes this work. They're running the show, cutting the actual show and putting it together. Then there's all the support that happens in Discord, all the support that happens in emails that you get. All of that takes people. And we have just an incredible group of people that are helping us with that. So we thank you all for your contribution. Today, the Tlaloc Traversal is if we had did this in person, we wandered around and asked these questions, we would have traveled 43,000 miles. That's 70,000 kilometers. And that is 344 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
You were talking about the scanning. I'm going to be working with some students to do the basketball halftime show. So we're like scanning the basketball court. I'm going to make all the floorboards and the particles. And
oh, nice. Yeah.
Stuff coming up out of the floor and all that sort of thing.
I got to tell you, like when I was in Arizona, the one thing that Polycam really likes is rocks. Like it just goes, oh, I got this. It just captures all of the geometry really, really fast. So it was really fun to walk around. We were in Segura National Park and found some good little nooks and crannies to pick up, but it does digitizes that really well. So I found 2 water tanks that were outside our hotel, and it's funny, I captured enough of it. Like I just took 5 photos with my iPhone. Like it wasn't like a big thing. I took 5 photos on the iPhone and I threw it into Metashape real quick just to see what would happen. And I got enough of the curvature and the geometry to, put stuff on it. Like the idea was, here's a photo and I want to put something on, but I got to get the curve just the same as there. It'd be great if I had 3D geometry.